Within a single 90-second interval, Steve Bannon blundered 3 times catastrophically. He first agreed to a live televised debate against Jasmine Crockett. Next, he referred to her as sweetheart. Thirdly, he smirked while doing so. For the next 72 hours, the ensuing fallout trended without pause, decimating his remaining credibility and proving that addressing a former public defender as sweetheart when you are already a 2-time convicted felon is not a successful strategy. Please comment below if you've ever witnessed a man use that condescending term towards a woman and immediately regret every life choice that led him to that moment, because this is going to be remarkable. The CNN special event had been advertised as America's future, promoted as a bipartisan dialogue, which should have been everyone's first clue that it would be neither bipartisan nor much of a dialogue. The setup was simple. Jake Tapper would moderate a debate between Steve Bannon, former Trump strategist, Breitbart executive, podcast provocateur, and double felon, and Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas, a freshman congresswoman, former public defender, and the woman who recently caused the phrase bleach blonde, bad-built butch body to go viral after Marjorie Taylor Greene insulted her. CNN's Atlanta studio was packed with 200 audience members carefully selected to represent a cross-section of American political perspectives, meaning half arrived furious and the rest were waiting to become upset. Naturally, Steve Bannon arrived first, clad in what seemed like 3-layered, untucked, rumpled shirts, while his countenance displayed that distinct reddish quality medical experts term gin blossoms and laypeople call a reason to visit a doctor. He appeared, as one reporter later described, like someone recently assaulted by his own reflection who then slept in an alley behind a party. He was perfectly in his element. Jasmine Crockett arrived precisely on schedule, which somehow felt more daunting than being earlier tardy. Dressed in a sharp suit with flawlessly styled hair, she brought 3 actual briefcases, the old-fashioned attorney kind that click open and thud satisfyingly upon a table. Jake Tapper assumed his position at the moderator's desk, wearing the expression of a man who had been instructed to referee an intense cage match while keeping it civil. "Good evening and welcome to this CNN special event," Tapper began. "Tonight we're discussing the future of American democracy with 2 very different perspectives on—" Bannon interrupted immediately because waiting for someone to finish speaking was apparently reserved for people not convicted of contempt of Congress. "Let's cut the BS, Jake. We all know why we're here. The establishment media wants to attack real Americans. They want to silence voices like mine, and they want to pretend that—" "Mr. Bannon," Tapper tried to interject, but Bannon was already gesturing toward Crockett, saying, "Sweetheart, let the adults talk first, okay? We'll get to your feelings in a minute." The audience gasped audibly, and the cameras captured that perfect collective intake of breath occurring when everyone in a room simultaneously realizes they are about to witness a metaphorical execution. Jasmine Crockett's expression remained unchanged, though her smile sharpened, precisely like someone just handed the exact opening she required. "Mr. Bannon," she said, her voice perfectly calm, "I'm a lawyer, a congresswoman, and a former public defender who spent years in courtrooms. You're a twice-convicted felon currently out on bond, but please, do go on about adults." The audience erupted, half in applause and half in shocked laughter, all suddenly very awake. Bannon's face transitioned from red to purple as he stammered, "That's a typical leftist smear." "It's a court record, Steve. The jury said guilty, the judge said guilty, and the only person who disagreed was the president who pardoned you, and even he couldn't save you from the state charges." Tapper tried to regain control, saying, "If we could please—" But it was too late. The battle had commenced, and Jasmine Crockett had brought receipts. Crockett opened her first briefcase with the deliberate calm prosecutors utilize right before ruining someone's entire week. "You know, Mr. Bannon, I want to thank you for that sweetheart comment. It saves me so much time. Because normally I'd have to spend several minutes establishing why you lack credibility, but you just demonstrated it yourself very efficiently." She withdrew a thick file, saying, "Now, since we're discussing credibility, let's talk about your resume. I notice you like to introduce yourself as a strategist, a political thinker, a voice for the forgotten man, But you left some things off your bio, so let me help you out. She opened the file. December 2020, you were indicted for fraud. Specifically, you were accused of stealing more than $1 million from donors to the We Build the Wall campaign. You remember that one, right? Bannon leaned back with arms crossed, saying, "That was a politically motivated—" Crockett interrupted. "You told donors that 100% of their money would go to building the wall. You said, and I'm quoting from your own promotional materials, not a penny goes to overhead or salaries. Do you remember saying that?" "The campaign was legitimate," he protested. But she continued, "The campaign paid you $20,000 per month in consulting fees for a year. That's $240,000. You also used donor money for personal expenses, including a luxury yacht, hotels, and a Cadillac Escalade. The jury saw the receipts, and that's why they convicted you." She pulled out another document saying, "President Trump pardoned you on the federal charges, but New York State filed their own charges. Different jurisdiction, no presidential pardon available. And then there's your other conviction." She looked up at him. "July 2022, convicted of contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a January 6th committee subpoena. The judge sentenced you to 4 months in federal prison, and you just got out in March." Bannon started to speak, but Crockett held up a hand, saying, "So when you called me sweetheart, like I'm some naive girl who wouldn't understand complex political issues, I just want to make sure we're all clear on the facts. You're a twice convicted felon, and I'm a lawyer with a law degree who passed the bar exam on the first try." She smiled, saying, "So yes, Steve, you can call me sweetheart, and I'll call you what a jury of your peers already called you twice: guilty. And unlike your presidential pardon, my law degree actually required passing a test." The audience exploded, and even some of the conservatives were laughing. Bannon's face had gone from purple to something approaching crimson. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The establishment media, the swamp, they're all—" Crockett interrupted. "The jury was the swamp? The judge was the swamp? The evidence was the swamp?" Crockett tilted her head, saying, "Or maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, you committed crimes and got caught." She closed the first file and withdrew another, saying to the camera, "Drop a guilty emoji in the comments if you think we should talk about his other legal problems next, because trust me, we're just getting started." Crockett didn't wait for Bannon to recover. She was already opening the second file with precise, unhurried movements, reflecting a prosecutor's rhythm. "Mr. Bannon, you're famous for a quote you said to Michael Lewis in 2018, 'Flood the zone with shit.' That was your media strategy, right? Just overwhelm people with so much misinformation that they can't fact-check fast enough." Bannon smirked, saying, "I said the Democrats and the media flood the zone." "No, Steve," she corrected. "You said you flood the zone. It's your strategy. And you know what? I appreciate the honesty, because most people don't openly admit their entire plan is literally to spread fecal matter everywhere. It's refreshing." A laugh came from the audience as she asked, "So let me ask, is that what you're doing right now, or is this actually your A-game?" Bannon leaned forward, trying to regain control, saying, "Look, sweetheart, we've covered—" "Steve," she interrupted, "try using my title. It's Representative Crockett. I know it's 3 syllables, so take your time." More laughter ensued, and Bannon was visibly flustered now as Crockett pulled documents from the file, saying, "Let's talk about your War Room podcast. In the 2 months before January 6th, 2021, you did 47 episodes. I had my staff count them. And in those 47 episodes, you made 213 false claims about election fraud. Those were legitimate questions about—" Bannon tried to say, but she cut him off. "No, false claims. We fact-checked every single one. Not legitimate questions, lies." She held up a transcript. "January 5th, 2021, the day before the Capitol attack. You said, and I'm quoting, 'All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.' You said, 'It's going to be moving. It's going to be quick.' You told your listeners, 'You made this happen. Tomorrow it's game day.'" She lowered the transcript, saying, "Game day. That's what you called it. The next day, a police officer lost an eye. Another lost fingers. Officer Brian Sicknick died. 140 officers were injured. 5 people died, and you called it game day. Bannon tried to interrupt, saying, I never told anyone to, but she continued over him. You spent 2 months telling people the election was stolen. You told them democracy was ending. You told them it was time to fight, and then you acted shocked when they did exactly what you'd been programming them to do. She pulled out another document saying, but here's the interesting part. After January 6th, when Congress asked you to testify about your role, about what you knew, about your communications with the organizers, you refused. You claimed executive privilege even though you didn't work for the White House. And that refusal is your second conviction, contempt of Congress. Crockett looked directly at the camera, saying, he'll tell you he's fighting for truth. He'll tell you he's a patriot, but when Congress asked him to tell the truth under oath, he said no, and a jury convicted him for it. She withdrew her phone and pulled up a website, saying, and you know what's really amazing? Your War Room podcast is still running, still spreading conspiracies, still asking for donations. I checked your website before coming here, and you're asking viewers to contribute to your fight fund. That's what you call it. She looked at Bannon, saying, you know what I call it? More fraud waiting to happen, because that's your pattern, Steve. Ask for money, promise patriotism, deliver fraud, then ask for more money for your legal defense. It's a beautiful system, the grift that keeps on grifting. Bannon was red-faced, stammering, you're twisting. I'm reading your own words, your own podcasts, your own website, your own court records. Crockett's voice was steel. You said flood the zone with shit. But here's the problem, Steve, and I know this from my time as a public defender representing actual working people, not the fake version you sell to donors. When you flood the zone with fecal matter, eventually you're just standing in it. She paused and added, and we can all smell you from here. The audience lost control, and even Jake Tapper was struggling not to smile as Crockett closed the second file, saying to the camera, share this if you're tired of carnival barkers treating democracy like a con game. Bannon was sweating now, his multiple shirt layers not helping as he tried to pivot and regain control of the narrative the way he usually did, by talking faster, louder, and more aggressively. You want to talk about corruption? Let's talk about the real corruption. Let's talk about open borders and globalists and the economic rape of working-class Americans by economic nationalism, Crockett interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a knife. That's your phrase, right? You call yourself an economic nationalist. Very sophisticated term. Much better branding than what it actually is. She opened the third briefcase, saying, let me see if I understand your philosophy correctly. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong. She pulled out a stack of papers, saying, these are articles published by Breitbart when you were executive chairman. I'd like to read some headlines. She held up the first one, reading, birth control makes women unattractive and crazy. That's economic nationalism? Another headline read, would you rather your child had feminism or cancer? Is that about economics? Another read, the solution to online harassment is simple, women should log off. Still waiting for the economics part. Bannon tried to interrupt, saying, those are provocative headlines meant to what? Generate clicks? Spread misogyny? Both? She retorted. She pulled out another document, saying, here's a quote from you, Steve, 2017. You said there were too many Asian CEOs in Silicon Valley. Direct quote, what does that have to do with economics? I was talking about immigration policy, he claimed. You were talking about race, you said, and I have the transcript, when 2/3 or 3/4 of the CEOs in Silicon Valley are from South Asia or from Asia, I think. You think what, Steve? That they're the wrong kind of Americans? She withdrew more documents, saying, let's talk about your economic nationalism in practice. When you ran Breitbart, you published Richard Spencer. You know who that is, right? A literal white nationalist, called for a peaceful ethnic cleansing, and you gave him a platform. Breitbart published a wide range of, Bannon began, but Crockett listed them. White nationalists? Yes, Milo Yiannopoulos, Steve King, the whole gang. Crockett's voice was sharp now. You called Breitbart the platform for the alt-right. Your words, not mine. The alt-right, which is just white nationalism with better marketing. She leaned forward, saying, "So let me ask you directly, Mr. Bannon. Define economic nationalism for me, and try to do it without describing anyone by their skin color or country of origin. Timer starts now." Bannon's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He tried again, saying, "It's about protecting American workers from who? Say it. Who are you protecting them from?" Silence followed, and she said, "See, that's the problem with dog whistles. They only work when people don't make you say the quiet part loud." Crockett pulled out another document saying, "But here's what's really funny about your economic nationalism. While you were running Breitbart and claiming to fight against China, you know who was paying your bills?" She held up the document saying, "Guo Wengui, Chinese billionaire fugitive from Chinese authorities, accused of fraud, bribery, money laundering. He gave you office space on his yacht. He paid your expenses. You lived on a Chinese billionaire's yacht while claiming to fight Chinese influence." Bannon stood up, shouting, "That's a gross misrepresentation." "Sit down, Steve. We're on live TV and you're under oath in the court of public opinion," she ordered. "Guo didn't just pay your expenses. You promoted his businesses. You helped him launch a media company. You appeared in his videos, all while claiming to be this great American nationalist." She pulled out a printout saying, "And then in 2023, Guo Wengui was arrested on fraud charges, accused of stealing $1 billion from his followers, many of whom found him through you." Crockett looked at Bannon, who had sat back down and was staring at the table, saying, "Economic nationalism. That's what you call it. You know what I call it? I'm a black woman from Texas, Mr. Bannon. I was a public defender. I know racism when I see it, and I also know a grift when I see it." She stacked the documents neatly, saying, "And you're both at the same time. You're racist and you're selling it. You've monetized bigotry. At least the other racists have the courage of their convictions, but you just have the conviction part, two of them." The audience was completely silent now, as this had gone from entertainment to something darker and more serious. Crockett's voice dropped lower, becoming more intense. "You wrap your racism in economic language. You call it nationalism. You claim you're fighting for workers. But you've never worked a real job in your life outside of finance and media. You've never stood on a factory floor. You've never missed a paycheck. You've never chosen between medicine and rent." She paused before adding, "I have. My constituents have. We know what economic struggle looks like. And it doesn't look like a man living on a Chinese billionaire's yacht telling us who the real Americans are." She closed the third briefcase, saying to the camera, "Comment receipts if you want to see the money trail next, because this man's finances are wilder than his shirt collection." Bannon was visibly rattled now, his usual bombast replaced with something closer to desperation as he kept trying to talk over Crockett to regain control. But she just waited him out with the patience of someone who had dealt with far more intimidating opponents in far worse courtrooms. Jake Tapper attempted to move to audience questions, but Crockett held up a finger, saying, "Actually, Jake, I'm not done. Mr. Bannon brought up working-class Americans, and I want to discuss his commitment to them, specifically his financial commitment." She opened the fourth briefcase, and this one was packed with what looked like tax documents, bank statements, and legal filings. "Now, Steve, I have to confess something. I'm just a simple public defender from Dallas, and I'm not sophisticated with the international finance, but I'm a little confused, and I'm hoping you can help me understand." She pulled out a document saying, "When you take millions of dollars from a Chinese fugitive while claiming to fight Chinese influence, is that hypocrisy or treason? I always get those two mixed up." A nervous laugh came from the audience as she continued, "Let me walk everyone through this because it's fascinating." She spread documents across the table saying, "Guo Wengui, the Chinese billionaire I mentioned, didn't just give you office space. He gave you a place to live on his yacht, the Lady May, a 150-foot yacht worth $28 million. You lived there rent-free for how long?" Bannon said nothing as she continued reading from documents filed in Guo's federal case. "You lived on that yacht from 2018 to 2020. That's 2 years of free housing on a yacht worth more than most Americans will earn in their lifetimes. while you were on your podcast telling working class people to tighten their belts. She pulled out another document saying, but it gets better. You also helped Guo launch a cryptocurrency, GTV. You promoted it on your War Room podcast, told your followers it was a great investment, a way to fight the Chinese Communist Party with capitalism. Crockett looked up, saying, GTV collapsed. Investors lost everything. Guo was arrested, and you never apologized, never explained, never gave the money back. She withdrew a list saying, speaking of money, let's talk about your shell companies. I had my staff pull your business registrations, Citizens for the American Republic, Citizens United for Responsibility and Ethics, the Government Accountability Institute. She looked at Bannon, saying, those are all your companies, Steve. Want to guess what they have in common? Silence followed before she answered. None of them have public donor lists. None of them disclose where their money comes from or where it goes. They're all registered in states with minimal disclosure requirements, and they all have similar names designed to sound patriotic and vaguely official. She pulled out tax liens, saying, here's another fun fact. According to public records, you owe back taxes in 3 different states. New York, $222,000, Florida, $38,000, Virginia, $91,000, totaling $351,000 in unpaid taxes. Crockett leaned back, saying, so let me get this straight. You ask working-class Americans to donate to your various funds. You take money from a Chinese billionaire fugitive. You live on a yacht and you don't pay your taxes. She let that sit before saying, but please tell us more about economic nationalism. Bannon tried to rally, claiming, those tax issues are being resolved through what? More shell companies? More donations? More cryptocurrency scams? She interrupted. Crockett pulled out another document saying, oh, speaking of which, when you were arrested for the We Build the Wall fraud, you know where they found you? She read from the document, on Guo Wengi's yacht off the coast of Connecticut, with 3 different passports. You were literally trying to flee the country when the postal inspectors arrested you. She looked at the camera, asking, 3 passports? Why does a patriotic American nationalist need 3 passports? I have one. Most Americans have one. What are you doing with 3? Bannon's lawyer, sitting in the front row, looked like he wanted to crawl under his seat as Bannon claimed the passports were for legitimate international travel to countries without extradition treaties. Crockett smiled, saying, that's what the prosecutor suggested in your bail hearing. You were a flight risk. That's why your bail was set so high. She pulled out a bank document saying, and speaking of money, the bail was $5 million. You paid it in cash. Where did that cash come from, Steve? Your fight fund? Guo? Some other foreign billionaire? Bannon stood up again, shouting, this is character assassination. It's your bank records, your tax liens, your business registrations, your arrest reports. I'm not assassinating your character, Steve. I'm just reading it out loud. She gathered the documents, saying, you wrap yourself in the flag. You call yourself a patriot. You claim to fight for American workers. But you hide money in shell companies, you dodge taxes, you take cash from Chinese billionaires, you live on yachts, and when you get caught, you try to flee the country with multiple passports. Her voice got quiet and hard as she said, you know what that makes you? Not a nationalist, not a patriot, not a working-class hero, just a con man with a yacht and a podcast. She closed the 4th briefcase with a decisive snap and said to the camera, tag someone who actually pays their taxes, unlike this patriot. The debate had been going for 38 minutes, and Steve Bannon looked like he had aged a decade. His multiple shirts were visibly damp with sweat, and his face had gone from purple to a concerning gray color. However, Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. She opened the 5th briefcase slowly and deliberately, this one containing what looked like transcripts and printed screenshots. Mr. Bannon, I want to talk about January 6th. I know you don't like talking about it. I know you took contempt charges rather than testify, but we're going to talk about it anyway. She pulled out a stack of transcripts, saying, let's play a game. I'll read quotes from your War Room podcast, and you tell me which ones came before January 6th. Ready? Bannon crossed his arms as she read. This is December 30th, 2020. Quote, all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Did you say that? Silence met her question as she continued. January 5th, 2021. Quote, tomorrow it's game day, so strap in. You made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day. And did you say that? Bannon stared at the table as she read on. January 5th, same episode. Quote, it's going to be moving, it's going to be quick. What was going to be moving and quick, Steve? Crockett pulled out another transcript saying, oh, here's my favorite. January 5th again, quote, we're on the point of attack tomorrow. We're going to bury Biden. Bury Biden. Those were your words. She set the transcripts down, saying, the next day, January 6th, the Capitol was attacked. A mob broke through police lines. They smashed windows. They hunted for members of Congress. They built a gallows. They chanted, hang Mike Pence, and they beat police officers with American flags. Her voice was shaking now, but with controlled fury as she listed the toll. Officer Brian Sicknick died. Officer Howard Liebengood died by suicide 4 days later. Officer Jeffrey Smith died by suicide 9 days after that. 140 officers were injured. One lost an eye. Another lost fingers. Multiple officers had traumatic brain injuries. She pulled out photos, not graphic ones, but images of injured officers in hospitals, saying, you didn't storm the Capitol, Steve. You're not that brave. You just spent 2 months telling thousands of people that democracy was ending, that the election was stolen, that it was time to fight. You wound them up and pointed them at the Capitol like weapons. Bannon tried to speak, saying, I never explicitly— Oh, we're doing explicitly now? Crockett's laugh was bitter. You spent your entire career speaking in code, dog whistles, plausible deniability, but on January 5th you weren't subtle. Game day. Point of attack. All hell is going to break loose. That's not political commentary. That's incitement. She pulled out the congressional subpoena saying, the January 6th committee wanted to ask you about that. They wanted to know what you knew and when you knew it. They wanted to understand your communications with rally organizers, your contacts with White House officials, your role in the conspiracy. She held up the subpoena saying, and you said no. You claimed executive privilege even though you didn't work for the executive branch. You refused to testify. You refused to produce documents. You told Congress, the people's representatives, to go to hell. She dropped the subpoena on the table saying, that's contempt of Congress. That's your second conviction. You know why that matters? Because when someone refuses to testify, when someone hides evidence, when someone claims privilege they don't have, it's because they're guilty. It's called consciousness of guilt, and prosecutors love it. Crockett leaned forward, saying, if you were innocent, Steve, you would have testified, you would have explained yourself, you would have said, here's what I meant, here's what I knew, I had no idea people would get violent. But you didn't. You took the contempt charge. You went to prison rather than answer questions under oath. She paused before adding, that tells me everything I need to know. Nice. She pulled out financial documents saying, and you know what's really disgusting? While officers were in the hospital, while families were planning funerals, you were making money. Your War Room podcast saw its highest ad revenue in January 2021. You were literally profiting from the violence. Bannon's face was ashen now as she continued. And you're still doing it, still spreading election lies, still asking for donations, still running the same scam? Crockett's voice was hard as diamond now, saying, you didn't just refuse to testify about January 6th. You refused to stop doing the same things that led to January 6th. She gathered the January 6th material, saying, you call yourself a patriot. Patriots don't incite mobs. Patriots don't attack the Capitol. Patriots don't beat police officers. And patriots definitely don't refuse to answer for their actions when Congress comes asking. She looked directly at Bannon, saying, you're not a patriot, Steve. You're just a career criminal who learned that wrapping yourself in the flag makes it harder for people to see the handcuffs. She closed the fifth briefcase and said to the camera, share this if you remember which party claims to back the blue. The studio was dead silent, and even the camera operators had stopped moving. as this had gone beyond political theater into something raw and more real. Steve Bannon looked broken. His usual bluster evaporated. He sat slumped in his chair, sweating through his shirts, unable to formulate a response. Jasmine Crockett opened the sixth briefcase. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, and when she spoke, her voice had lost the prosecutorial edge, now carrying something closer to genuine puzzlement. You know what amazes me, Steve? Most people, after their first fraud conviction, might reconsider their life choices, might think, maybe I should stop defrauding people, but not you. You got more creative. She pulled out a documents about cryptocurrency saying GTV, that was Guo Wengi's cryptocurrency. You promoted it heavily on your podcast, told your listeners it was a great investment, a way to fight communism with capitalism. Very patriotic messaging. She read from a transcript. September 2020, you said, quote, "This is a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. This is how we fight back. This is how we win." You told people to invest their savings, their retirement funds. You made it sound like a holy war. She looked up, saying, GTV collapsed completely. Investors lost everything. Millions of dollars just gone. Guo Wengui was arrested in 2023 for fraud, the indictment detailing how he'd stolen over $1 billion from his followers. She pulled out a list of names, saying, I had my staff reach out to some of the people who lost money in GTV. I want to know what they have in common. They all heard about it from your podcast. They trusted you. You were the voice of the forgotten man, right? You were fighting for them. Her voice was heavy with disgust as she read. Margaret from Ohio, retired teacher, lost $47,000, her entire retirement savings. Robert from Florida, veteran, lost $32,000. Linda from Pennsylvania, widow, lost $73,000, her husband's final gift to her. She sat down the list, saying, those are real people, Steve, real Americans, the working class people you claim to represent, and you led them into a scam run by a Chinese billionaire fugitive. Bannon tried to speak, saying, I was also a victim of Guo, but Crockett cut him off. You lived on his yacht, he paid your expenses, you promoted his businesses for years, you weren't a victim, you were an accomplice. She pulled out more documents, saying, and you know what's really something? After GTV collapsed, after people lost everything, you never apologized. You never explained. You just moved on to the next thing. She held up a printout from his website saying, your War Room website right now today. You're asking for donations to your fight fund. Quote, help Steve fight back against political persecution. Every dollar goes directly to legal defense. She looked at the camera asking, does it though? Because we've seen this before. We build the wall. Not a penny goes to overhead except $240,000 went to you. How do we know this fight fund is different? She pulled out business registrations saying, the fight fund goes to a non-profit you control. No public disclosure of how the money is spent, no audits, no accountability, just another shell company collecting donations from people who think they're supporting a patriot. That's Crockett's voice got quieter and more intense as she said, here's what kills me, Steve. Your whole brand is, they're lying to you, the media is lying, the government is lying, the elites are scamming you. Don't trust anyone. And you're right, someone is scamming them. She pointed at him saying, it's you, you're the scam. You've convinced working people that everyone else is corrupt, while you're literally convicted of corruption twice. You've told them the system is rigged while you're rigging it. You've warned them about con men while running con after con after con. She gathered the documents, listing them. GTV, We Build the Wall, the Fight Fund, 3 separate scams, same victims, different day, and after each one falls apart, you just move to the next one, because there's always another sucker who believes you're on their side. Her voice rose as she said, you know what that is? That's not populism. That's not nationalism. That's not even politics. That's just sociopathy. With a podcast. She leaned back, saying, Margaret from Ohio? She can't retire now. She's 72 and she's still working because you took her savings. Robert from Florida. He can't afford his medications because you told him GTV was a safe investment. Linda from Pennsylvania? She lost her dead husband's final gift to her because she trusted you. Crockett's eyes were fierce now as she said, "And you know what you're doing right now, right this second? Asking for more, the fight fund, legal defense. Same scam, different branding. You are the grift that keeps on grifting." She closed the sixth briefcase with force and said to the camera, "Comment if you know someone who lost money to one of his schemes. Let's see how many victims are watching." The debate had run over its allotted time, and Jake Tapper had given up trying to moderate. The audience sat in stunned silence, and Steve Bannon looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. However, Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. She didn't open the seventh briefcase immediately, instead just sitting there looking at Bannon with an expression that was almost sad, almost pitying. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, quieter, no performance, no rhetoric, just simple, devastating observation. "You know, Steve, I've been sitting here listening to you talk about the swamp and the establishment and the elites. You use those words a lot. They're your brand, the outsider, the rebel, the voice of the forgotten man." She tilted her head, saying, "So I want to check something. Let's talk about your background." She pulled out a biographical document saying, "You went to Virginia Tech, then Georgetown, then Harvard Business School. That's 3 elite universities, not community college, not state school. Elite institutions that cost more than most Americans make in a year." She looked up, saying, "You worked at Goldman Sachs, literally the most elite Wall Street firm in existence. You were a vice president in their mergers and acquisitions department. You made millions." And she produced another document saying, "You were a Hollywood producer. You made films, lived in Los Angeles, the definition of coastal elite." Another document followed. "You worked in the Pentagon. You were a naval officer, a special assistant to the chief of naval operations. That's not outsider status, Steve. That's inside the military-industrial complex." She spread the documents out, saying, "You worked at the White House, chief strategist to the president. That's not draining the swamp. That is the swamp. You can't get more establishment than the West Wing." Crockett leaned forward, saying, "So let me understand. You went to Harvard, worked on Wall Street, made movies in Hollywood, worked at the Pentagon, worked at the White House, and somehow you're the outsider fighting the elites?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it as she said, "Steve, you are the elite. You're the definition of the establishment. You've spent your entire adult life in the most powerful institutions in America: Goldman Sachs, the Pentagon, the White House, Harvard Business School." She pulled out photos of his various residences, saying, "You've lived on a yacht, multiple yachts actually. You've stayed in luxury hotels around the world. You wear multiple Barber jackets that cost $500 each. Your podcast setup costs more than most Americans spend on a car." She gestured at him, saying, "Look at you right now. You're wearing what, 3 shirts? Those are expensive shirts, Steve." Rumpled, yes, but expensive. This whole disheveled aesthetic is carefully curated. It costs money to look like you don't care about money. Crockett's voice got harder as she said, "Working-class people don't have shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Working-class people don't have lawyers fighting contempt charges. Working-class people can't afford to refuse congressional subpoenas. Working-class people don't live on Chinese billionaires' yachts." She stood up, saying, "Your entire life has been one elite institution after another, and now you make money convincing actual working people that you understand their struggles, that you're one of them, that you're fighting the establishment on their behalf." She walked around the table, stopping a few feet from him, saying, "But you're not fighting the establishment, Steve. You're just mad the establishment kicked you out. You got fired from the White House. You got fired from Breitbart. You got convicted of fraud. You got convicted of contempt. The elite club revoked your membership, and now you're pretending you were never in it." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she said, "You called me sweetheart at the start of this debate, like I was some naive girl who wouldn't understand your sophisticated worldview. But I'm from Dallas, Texas. I was a public defender. I represented actual working-class people, not the fake version you sell on your podcast." She continued, "Real people, people who couldn't afford bail, people who couldn't hire lawyers, people who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make rent. She paused before saying, I know what struggle looks like, and it doesn't look like a man with 3 Harvard degrees living on a yacht telling me about the forgotten man. Crockett walked back to her seat and finally opened the 7th briefcase. It was filled with photographs. These are my clients from when I was a public defender. I've blurred their faces for privacy, but these are real people. This is Juan. He worked construction, got arrested for a traffic warrant because he couldn't afford to pay the ticket, spent 3 days in jail, lost his job, couldn't make rent. She held up another photo saying, This is Shanice, single mother, 3 kids, working at Walmart. Got arrested for shoplifting diapers because she couldn't afford them. The diaper box was worth $12. Her bail was set at $500. She sat in jail for 2 weeks because she couldn't pay. Another photo followed. This is Marcus, veteran, PTSD, homeless, arrested for sleeping in a park, no family, no resources, no yacht. She set the photos down gently, saying, Those are the forgotten people, Steve, not your podcast listeners who donate to your fight fund, not the people who can afford to invest in cryptocurrency schemes, the actual forgotten people who don't have anyone fighting for them. Her voice was shaking now as she said, And you know what you've done for them? Nothing. You've done nothing. You've never represented an indigent defendant. You've never worked in a homeless shelter. You've never volunteered at a food bank. You've never spent one single day of your privileged life helping people who actually need help. She pointed at him, saying, But you'll wrap yourself in their struggle. You'll use their pain. You'll exploit their anger. You'll tell them that immigrants took their jobs and elites took their dignity and Democrats took their country. And then you'll ask them to donate to your legal defense fund while you live on a yacht. Crockett's voice got quiet and deadly as she said, You spent this whole debate trying to dismiss me, trying to talk over me, trying to condescend to me, and the whole time I was just reading your record back to you, your convictions, your frauds, your schemes, your own words from your own podcast. She gathered all 7 briefcases, saying, I didn't destroy you tonight, Steve. You destroyed yourself years ago. Every fraud, every lie, every grift. You built this. I just made sure everyone watching knows exactly who you are. She looked at the camera, saying, A twice-convicted felon in rumpled designer shirts calling women sweetheart on live TV while facing more charges, still running scams, still lying, still grifting. The only thing you've ever built is a career on other people's anger and your own corruption. She turned back to Bannon, saying, And the saddest part? You called me sweetheart because you thought I was the amateur in this debate. But Steve, I'm a lawyer. I spent years in courtrooms. I know how to build a case. I know how to cross-examine a witness. I know how to present evidence. She smiled that prosecutor's smile one more time, saying, And I just prosecuted you in front of millions of people using nothing but your own record, your own words, your own court documents, your own arrests, your own convictions. After a final pause, she said, The jury is watching, and they can see exactly what you are. She sat down, saying, No further questions. The studio erupted, with half the audience on their feet applauding and the other half in stunned silence. Jake Tapper tried to regain control, but the debate was clearly over. Steve Bannon sat motionless, his face gray, his multiple shirts soaked through, looking like a man who just realized he had been outclassed, outmaneuvered, and utterly destroyed. He tried to stand to say something, to salvage even a shred of dignity, but there was nothing left to salvage. So he walked off the set, without waiting for closing statements, without shaking hands, without any of the usual formalities, just fleeing with cameras capturing every moment. Jasmine Crockett remained seated, calmly organizing her briefcases, looking like a lawyer who had just won a case she had prepared for months, because that's exactly what she was. Share this with everyone who's sick of con men cosplaying as patriots, she said to the camera. CNN servers crashed within 2 minutes of the debate ending. The network later reported that 8.7 million people had been watching live, the highest viewership for a cable news event in over a year. When they put the full debate on YouTube, it got 12 million views in the first 24 hours. The hashtag #ArtStrategy started trending within 30 seconds of Crockett's first response, and within an hour it had been tweeted 1.2 million times. trending in 17 countries by morning. However, the real viral moment came from TikTok. The sweetheart sound ceased. Bannon saying, "Sweetheart, let the adults talk," immediately followed by Crockett's, "You're a twice convicted felon," was used in 340,000 videos within 48 hours. People applied it to every context imaginable: bad bosses, condescending relatives, mansplaining coworkers, that guy at the party who won't stop talking. But the sound that really took over was from the final exchange. "You are the swamp" became a rallying cry, appearing on protest signs, T-shirts, and bumper stickers. A gospel choir in Atlanta incorporated it into their Sunday service, and a high school debate team in Ohio made it their motto. Within a week, someone had edited together every time Bannon said elites or establishment, juxtaposed with images of him at Goldman Sachs, at Harvard, at the White House, and on yachts, ending with Crockett saying, "You are the swamp," garnering 23 million views. The conservative media response was scattered. Fox News didn't know what to do because they couldn't defend the fraud convictions, explain away the contempt charge, or justify the yacht living and Chinese billionaire connections. For the first 48 hours, they simply didn't cover it. When they finally did address it, the take was just vague both-sidesism, claiming heated exchange on CNN with no details or clips. Tucker Carlson's replacement tried to claim Crockett had been rude and disrespectful, but it didn't land, as the internet immediately flooded with clips of male politicians interrupting women, talking over them and dismissing them, all without Fox News calling it rude. Sean Hannity attempted to defend Bannon on his radio show, arguing that Bannon is a patriot targeted by political persecution from the deep state. When a caller asked, "But Sean, didn't a jury convict him twice?" Hannity moved to the next caller. Ben Shapiro took a different approach, arguing that Crockett had used emotional appeals instead of logical arguments, which might have been more effective if the entire debate hadn't consisted of Crockett methodically presenting documentation while Bannon sputtered and deflected. The internet found clips of Shapiro praising fact-based arguments and documented evidence in other contexts, making the hypocrisy too delicious, and facts and logic started trending, though not the way Ben wanted. Even some conservative commentators couldn't defend Bannon. Megyn Kelly on her podcast noted that she had interviewed and debated Crockett, calling her sharp and stating that if you call her sweetheart thinking it will rattle her, you've already lost, adding that Bannon should have known better. Charlie Sykes, the never-Trump conservative, noted, "This is what happens when you build a movement on grievance and grift. Eventually someone shows up with receipts, and Bannon had this coming." Even some MAGA figures stayed quiet. Marjorie Taylor Greene, normally Bannon's ally, didn't tweet about the debate once, and that silence spoke volumes. Donald Trump, asked about Bannon at a rally in South Carolina, gave the most damning response possible. "Steve who? I barely knew him. He worked for me for, 5 minutes? Not a serious person. Very low energy. Heard he got destroyed on TV. Sad." When Trump won't defend you, you're done. The legal consequences cascaded quickly. New York Attorney General Letitia James announced her office was reviewing the GTV cryptocurrency situation to determine if New York investors had been defrauded on Tuesday. By Thursday, 3 state attorneys general in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida announced similar reviews. By the following Monday, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of GTV investors, with the complaint citing Bannon's War Room episodes promoting the investment. One lawyer told reporters, "Ms. Crockett did our job for us. She laid out the entire case on national television." The IRS, notably quiet about Bannon's tax issues previously, suddenly wasn't quiet anymore. An anonymous source told the Wall Street Journal the agency was conducting a comprehensive review of Bannon's finances, including his shell companies and foreign income. Multiple banks that had held accounts for Bannon's various nonprofits quietly closed them, citing reputational risk and compliance concerns when asked. The political fallout was swift and brutal. War Room lost its remaining major sponsors within a week, including MyPillow, his most loyal advertiser. Mike Lindell stated, "We support patriots, not convicted felons," a statement that was both hypocritical and telling. His podcast downloads dropped 47% in 2 weeks. His Substack lost 12,000 paid subscribers, and his speaking fees, previously around $50,000 for major conservative events, dried up completely. CPAC, which had given Bannon prime speaking slots for years, announced their lineup for the upcoming conference without him. When asked why, the organizers simply said they were focusing on the future of the conservative movement, translating to, "You're the past, and the past it is toxic." Republican candidates running in 2024 started scrubbing their websites. Photos with Bannon disappeared, endorsement quotes vanished, and one representative from Pennsylvania literally edited Bannon out of a campaign video, replacing him with a flag. The Trump campaign, always attentive to political wins, made it clear that Bannon was persona non grata. No more private planes, no more Mar-a-Lago access, no more whispered strategy sessions. He had been excommunicated. The personal destruction was almost poetic. Within 3 weeks of the debate, reports suggested the yacht he had been staying on, not Guo's this time, but another belonging to another wealthy supporter, was no longer available to him, and he was seen staying at a mid-range hotel in Virginia. The symbolism of moving from yachts to Holiday Inn was not lost on anyone. His multiple legal cases, previously grinding slowly through the courts, suddenly got more attention, as judges willing to grant delays started denying them, with one judge writing, "The defendant has had ample time to prepare. This case will proceed to trial." 6 months after the debate, the transformation was complete. A documentary titled Sweetheart premiered at Sundance, using the CNN debate as its opening and closing bookends, with the middle section tracing Bannon's career from Goldman Sachs through his convictions. The filmmaker interviewed GTV victims, We Build the Wall donors, former Breitbart employees, and January 6th officers. Bannon declined to participate, so the filmmakers included his sweetheart comment in the opening credits. The film won the Audience Award and was acquired by Netflix for distribution. War Room still existed, but as a shadow of its former self. Production quality had dropped, the guest list had declined from senators and governors to fringe podcasters and conspiracy theorists, and downloads were a fraction of what they had been. Bannon still claimed millions of listeners, but actual data suggested hundreds of thousands and declining. He tried to spin it as the establishment trying to silence him, but it's hard to claim persecution when you're a twice-convicted felon who got destroyed on live television by a freshman congresswoman with receipts. The conservative movement had moved on, the MAGA world had moved on, and even the conspiracy theorists had newer, shinier grifters to follow. Steve Bannon had become irrelevant. The final indignity came from an unexpected source. In December, Representative Jasmine Crockett was invited to give the keynote address at the National Press Club, receiving a standing ovation before speaking a word. 7 months ago, she told the crowd, a man called me sweetheart on national television. He thought it would diminish me. He thought it would make me easier to dismiss. He was wrong. She paused, then continued, but here's what I want young women to understand. He didn't call me sweetheart because I'm young or because I'm a woman. He called me sweetheart because he was scared. He saw the briefcases. He saw the preparation. He knew what was coming. Another pause followed. And he tried to make himself feel bigger by making me feel smaller. It's the oldest trick in the book, and it didn't work. She smiled before saying, because I came prepared. I did my homework. I knew his record better than he did. And when he tried to dismiss me, I had 7 briefcases of reasons why he should have taken me seriously. The crowd erupted as she concluded, so to every young woman who's been called sweetheart or honey or any other diminishing name by a man who underestimated you, do your homework, bring your receipts, build your case, and when they try to dismiss you, show them exactly who you are. She paused for effect, adding, and make sure the cameras are rolling. The applause lasted 5 minutes, and Time magazine named her one of their 100 most influential people for the second time, with the essay written by a former federal prosecutor who noted, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate, she conducted a public trial and secured a conviction in the court of public opinion. The photo they used showed her sitting calmly at the CNN desk, 7 briefcases visible, with the faintest hint of a smile under the headline, "The Prosecutor and Steve Bannon." He posted occasionally on Truth Social, ranted on his diminished podcast, and claimed he was the victim of political persecution. A few diehard supporters still believed him, but most people had moved on. Every few months, a reporter would ask him if he regretted calling Crockett sweetheart, and every time he would deflect, claim it was taken out of context or blame the media. But never once did he say yes. This is probably why, to this day, when anyone searches Steve Bannon on Google, the autocomplete suggestions include sweetheart, convicted felon, and destroyed by Jasmine Crockett. The internet never forgets, and neither do voters. Steve Bannon called Jasmine Crockett sweetheart and thought it would make her easier to dismiss. But she had 7 briefcases full of his criminal record, a law degree, and 53 minutes of live television to explain why underestimating her was his final mistake. He walked into that studio as a political provocateur and walked out as a convicted felon who got prosecuted on national TV by the sweetheart he had dismissed. What does your media diet look like? Are you listening to actual patriots or convicted felons in rumpled shirts selling crypto scams? Because sooner or later, everyone's record catches up to them. Who is ready to do their homework and bring receipts?